There is a very specific architecture to the way you enter a room. It is not something you decide to do, it is a neurological reflex. Before a conversation even begins, before a single word is exchanged, your brain is already running a complex calibration protocol. You scan the environment, not for threats directed at you, but for the possibility that you are the threat. You read the micro-expressions, shifts in posture, and slight changes in atmospheric tension. Your baseline assumption, coded deep within your predictive processing systems, is that if something feels off, you are the variable responsible. This is not a matter of low self-esteem. That term is too flat, too imprecise for the mechanism at play. What is happening is an aggressive, chronic overcorrection of your social positioning. You have learned to absorb the friction of every interaction. If someone is irritated, you trace it back to something you might have done. If a silence stretches too long, you feel the physical weight of it as a personal failure. You constantly soften your edges, adjust your volume, and preemptively manage the emotional weather of the people around you. You are operating like a systemic shock absorber. But this hypervigilance requires immense metabolic energy. Your nervous system perpetually anticipates an accusation that has not yet been spoken. It reacts to a phantom court case where you are always the defendant. You do this so automatically that you fail to realize you are treating your own existence as a structural error. The question is not why you feel this way. The question is what your brain learned early on that made this self-surveillance the only logical strategy for survival. When you enter a dynamic social space, your predictive processing engine does not merely observe, it actively hunts for dissonance. To a nervous system trained to view itself as the origin of conflict, neutral social data is inherently terrifying. A colleague looking away during a conversation, a partner sighing heavily from the other room, a delayed response to a casual message. These are not perceived as random fluctuations in human behavior. Your brain instantly categorizes them as indictments. You misread fatigue as disappointment, distraction as rejection, and silence as a pending verdict. Because you were treated as the problem, your cognitive architecture has concluded that peace is fragile, and your presence is the variable most likely to break it. Therefore, every social interaction becomes a high-stakes hostage negotiation, where you are both the negotiator and the captive. You begin to deploy preemptive apologies for things you have not done. You over-explain your thought process to ensure your intentions cannot be criminalized. You laugh at the expense of your own boundaries to release the tension you imagine you have caused. This continuous calibration creates a profound distortion in how you experience human connection. You believe you are being deeply empathetic, highly attuned to the needs of others. But this is not empathy. It is a defense mechanism masquerading as compassion. You are not actually connecting with the person in front of you. You are interacting with a simulated threat model of that person, desperately trying to neutralize their potential anger before it materializes. This brings us to the quiet, devastating cost of this mechanism. You are running a relentless algorithm to keep everyone else regulated, but the metabolic toll on your own system is unsustainable. The energy required to constantly monitor and manage the emotional temperature of a room leaves you hollowed out. You survive the interaction, but you are not actually there. Let us examine the architecture of this exhaustion. The fatigue you experience after a seemingly ordinary social encounter is not the result of introversion or a lack of stamina. It is the direct metabolic consequence of running a secondary, highly demanding cognitive process alongside every interaction. While others are simply participating in a conversation, your nervous system is actively rendering a multidimensional threat matrix. You are calculating the optimal response to keep the environment stable, simulating potential negative reactions before they occur, and constantly auditing your own behavior for infractions. Your brain is allocating a massive percentage of its available energy to a defense protocol that cannot be switched off. To understand why your neurology refuses to abandon this draining strategy, we must look at the mechanism of internalized fault. When a developing brain is placed in an environment where caregivers or dominant figures are emotionally volatile, inconsistent, or inherently critical, it faces a catastrophic failure of predictability. A child cannot process the reality that the adults they depend on are fundamentally unstable or fundamentally flawed. That conclusion induces a state of absolute helplessness, which is biologically intolerable. So, the predictive processing engine executes a brilliant, albeit devastating, cognitive pivot. It decides that the environment is not the problem, you are the problem. This is not a conscious emotional choice, it is a neurological survival algorithm. If you are the structural error causing the chaos, then the chaos suddenly makes sense. More importantly, if you are the variable that is broken, you retain a microscopic illusion of agency. If you just learn to be quieter, to anticipate better, to absorb more friction, to become entirely frictionless yourself, you can theorize a future where the punishment stops. You wired your identity around the assumption of guilt because assuming guilt was the only way to maintain a coherent model of a dangerous world. The tragedy of this mechanism is its permanence. You are no longer in that environment, yet your brain continues to pay the evolutionary tax of surviving it. You still walk into rooms carrying the absolute certainty that any negative shift in the atmospheric pressure is your responsibility to resolve. And because you have spent a lifetime practicing this preemptive self-correction, you have become exceptionally good at it. But efficiency, in a pathological coping mechanism, only guarantees that the mechanism will consume you faster. Let us look closely at the machinery of this assumption. When you are repeatedly treated as the localized source of friction, your predictive processing system stops evaluating individual data points and simply hardcodes a new baseline schema. I am the structural flaw. Every subsequent interaction is filtered through this lens. This is the partial revelation of your operating system. Your brain does not waste time asking if you caused the shift in someone's mood. It immediately bypasses the diagnostic phase and moves straight into damage control. You are attempting to solve a math equation where you have permanently assigned yourself as the negative integer. But here is where the architecture of your survival strategy creates a profound, almost paradoxical distortion in your identity. You view this constant self-surveillance as a form of humility, a painful acknowledgement of your inherent defectiveness. You see yourself as small, accommodating, and perpetually in the way. However, neurologically speaking, this mechanism requires a staggering degree of self-centering. You have inadvertently constructed a model of reality where you are the absolute center of everyone else's psychological universe. If a friend is quiet, it is about you. If a manager sends a brief email, it is a reaction to you. If a room feels tense, your presence is the gravitational pull causing it. This is not humility. It is an involuntary, trauma-induced God complex. You have assigned yourself an impossible level of agency over the emotional states of other human beings. You believe you possess the power to destabilize a room simply by breathing wrong. You have convinced yourself that the internal weather of other adults, people with their own complex histories, sleep deficits, and unseen stressors, is entirely dependent on your micro-behaviors. The identity you hold so tightly, the one that tells you that you are fundamentally broken and burdensome, is actually an illusion of control. It is terrifying to accept that you are the problem, but it is infinitely more terrifying to accept that you are completely irrelevant to the sudden silence of the person sitting across from you. If you are not the cause of the chaos, then the chaos is random, and you are entirely powerless to stop it. The neurological weight of this realization is immense. You are trapped in a paradox, clinging to the identity of the instigator because the alternative, being a mere bystander to an unpredictable world, feels like annihilation. If you genuinely accept that your chronic self-blame is not a moral failing, but a hypervigilant cognitive algorithm, we must look at what this algorithm actually does to the social ecosystem around you. This is where the architecture of your identity begins to collapse entirely. You have spent your life believing that by shrinking, by constantly auditing your behavior, and by preemptively absorbing the blame, you are protecting other people from yourself. You view your hypervigilance as a noble shield. But neurologically speaking, a nervous system locked in constant threat prediction does not act as a shield. It acts as an aggressive tuning fork. When you enter a room anticipating that you will be perceived as the problem, your brain does not simply wait for the verdict. Your predictive processing engine actively attempts to resolve the agonizing uncertainty by subtly provoking the exact environment it fears. This is the reframing of your entire survival mechanism. You are not passively misreading the room. Through your tense posture, your hyper-apologetic phrasing, and your suffocating over-attunement, you are introducing a bizarre, unnameable friction into the physical space. You force the people around you to navigate a maze of your invisible tripwires. They feel the immense, silent pressure of your expectation that they are inevitably going to be angry with you. Unconsciously, they begin to react to that invisible pressure. They become stiff, they become distant, or they become noticeably irritated, not because of who you inherently are, but because interacting with your relentless defensive posture requires too much of their own cognitive bandwidth. This is the ultimate, brutal inversion of your identity. By operating under the absolute certainty that you are the structural flaw, you unconsciously manufacture the very dynamic you are desperately trying to prevent. You construct a tight, self-fulfilling prophecy, where the people around you eventually morph into the frustrated, critical figures your brain originally predicted they would be. And here is the darkest mechanism of all. When they finally pull away or snap under the weight of your preemptive apologies, your predictive processing system registers this painful outcome as a biological victory. It records a successful prediction. It sacrifices your reality, your peace, and your social connections just to maintain the terrifying, familiar coherence of its baseline model. To understand the sheer scale of this architectural adaptation, we must zoom out from the isolated interactions and observe how this predictive engine processes the broader world. You do not simply misread a single room, you misread the entire social construct. This hypervigilance is not a localized glitch that happens only during stressful meetings or difficult conversations. It is the operating system through which you filter every incoming data point. A delayed text message is not a delay. It is a calculated withdrawal of affection based on something you said yesterday. A neutral facial expression from a cashier is not fatigue. It is an intuitive judgment of your character. You are universally running a background application that assumes the external world is a hostile environment, and that hostility is always specifically activated by your presence. You have universalized your own culpability. When you view this through the lens of thermodynamics, the profound exhaustion you feel every single day stops being a mystery and becomes a biological inevitability. We must normalize the extreme metabolic cost of what you are doing. The human brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's energy just to maintain baseline functioning. When you are forcing that same organ to constantly run a multidimensional threat matrix, to simulate parallel realities where you might have offended someone, and to actively suppress your own natural responses to avoid friction, you are exponentially increasing its computational load. The chronic fatigue you experience is not a sign of emotional weakness or a lack of resilience. It is the precise, logical output of a biological system that is being run at maximum capacity with no cooling period. You are literally burning through your cellular energy reserves to fund a defense mechanism against a threat that exists almost entirely within your predictive processing models. Your exhaustion is not a symptom of depression. It is the mathematics of cognitive overload. But here is where the architecture of your identity becomes devastatingly complicated. You have built a self-concept entirely around the idea that you are the structural flaw, and that your only value is in your ability to detect and neutralize this flaw before anyone else notices it. You preemptively apologize, you shrink, and you absorb the blame. But what happens when you actually do make a mistake? Because you are human, actual friction is inevitable. You will eventually drop a project, forget an important detail, or genuinely hurt someone's feelings. For a neurologically regulated individual, a mistake is an isolated event. It is a data point that requires correction. For your nervous system, a genuine mistake is catastrophic. It is not an isolated event, It is the final, undeniable proof that your core baseline model was correct all along. When you actually cause a problem, your brain does not process it as a simple error. It processes it as an absolute validation of your inherent defectiveness. All the energy you spent trying to prevent this exact scenario suddenly feels wasted. Yet paradoxically, your brain feels a twisted sense of relief. The ambiguity is gone. The terrible anticipation is over. You finally have the tangible proof that you are exactly what you always feared you were. And because you have spent your entire life preparing for this exact conviction, you do not defend yourself. You collapse into the role of the guilty party with zero resistance, accepting disproportionate punishment because, to your deeply wired identity, any punishment feels like justice. You become the architect of your own prosecution, using your real mistakes as the foundation to justify a lifetime of imagined guilt. There is a brutal, unspoken transaction at the core of this psychological architecture. To understand why your brain refuses to abandon this exhausting protocol, you must look at what it is actually buying with your metabolic currency. You are engaged in a permanent trade-off. By voluntarily accepting the role of the structural flaw in every interaction, you are purchasing the illusion of predictability. For a nervous system that was fundamentally destabilized by unpredictable environments, certainty is the highest possible currency. If you are the problem, then the world makes sense. If you are the cause of the friction, then you theoretically hold the power to stop it. You are trading your authentic reality for a functional, albeit agonizing, defense mechanism. The predictive processing engine does not care about your happiness. It only cares about your survival through pattern recognition. To your brain, a predictable punishment is biologically safer than an unpredictable peace. If you drop the hypervigilance, if you stop scanning the room for evidence of your own guilt, you are forced to step into a void of absolute uncertainty. You would have to accept that other people's moods are entirely out of your control, that sudden silences might mean nothing, and that you cannot engineer safety by simply shrinking yourself. This trade-off partially clarifies why the mechanism is so resistant to change. You are not holding on to this guilt because you hate yourself. You are holding on to it because the alternative is cognitive freefall. If you are not the gravitational center of the conflict, then you are just a fragile organism in a chaotic universe where people can be angry, distant, or cruel for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with you. The mechanism protects you from that terrifying helplessness by giving you a job. Manage the room, monitor the micro-expressions, absorb the impact. But the cost of this continuous employment is total isolation. You are in the room, but you are not of it. You are interacting with your own threat simulations, not with the human beings standing in front of you. You survive every conversation, but you leave it completely unseen. You have successfully engineered a reality where you are safe from sudden blame, but only because you have already blamed yourself for everything. The system works perfectly. It keeps you secure inside a prison entirely constructed from your own preemptive apologies. And yet, the core question of who you actually are outside of this defensive posture remains entirely unanswered. The architecture of this survival mechanism is virtually flawless. It has successfully kept you employed as the shock absorber for every social interaction you have ever entered. But eventually, you will find yourself in a room where the atmospheric pressure is entirely neutral. A space where no one is secretly angry, where the silence is not a pending verdict, and where your hypervigilant scanning detects absolutely no fluctuations. Your predictive processing engine will run its diagnostic protocol. It will search for the dissonance, and it will find nothing. This is the moment the system faces its ultimate crisis. If you are not the structural flaw, and if you are not actively managing the emotional weather of the people around you, the fundamental premise of your identity collapses. The neurological machinery that has defined your existence for decades suddenly has no data to process. You are left standing in the terrifying quiet of a safe room, holding a defense mechanism that is entirely obsolete. The question is no longer how to stop misreading the room. The mechanism is too deeply wired to simply be unlearned with logic. The real unresolved variable is what remains of your identity? The brain does not know how to answer this. It only knows how to continuously brace for the next inevitable impact.